This episode was sponsored by the Geopolitical Insight and Education Foundation. Want to find out more? Check the link in our show notes. Welcome to another episode of Legal for Tech, the podcast. So guys, you do recognize my voice. It's always Rosie here, and as I've said many times, this is just with students and young professionals who are very interested in anything that has to do with technology, and yes, it's regulation. So today I'm actually alone. Giacomo has abandoned me, but he's left me with two amazing people, of which one I already interviewed before, and you probably remember him. His name is Claudio Novelli. He's a friend of the podcast. Hi, Claudio. Great to see you.
Hi, thank you for having us.
And no, absolutely, a great pleasure. I'm sorry if I broke the ladies first kind of protocol, but I'm really happy to actually have on the podcast Giulia Sandri, his co-author in one of the great papers that we're actually going to discuss today. Hi, Giulia, great to see you.
Hi, thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure. And yes, I did say co-author, but actually, as you were explaining in the preview to this podcast, the idea for this paper actually came from you. And let me quite quickly just enunciate the name of the paper, because I think everyone will be very interested in it. And also they can find the link in our show notes. As always, you guys know it. How to detect and measure the AI dangers to democracy. So we're going to talk about AI, of course, word of the day, but also we're going to talk about democracy, which is very important, especially considering that Claudio is in the US. So, yay. So, Giulia, you are in Brussels, another place where democracy is made day by day, I'm told. How did the idea for this paper come to mind? How did you decide to choose this title? And why did you kind of come up with this idea of finding a method to measure the damage of democracy created by the AI?
So, well, first of all, I have recently transitioned from a purely academic career to a more practitioner side of things. I've been a professor of political science in France for more than 12 years, and then I moved to the University of Brussels in Brussels, but also have a position as research and development manager in a European NGO, which is called European Citizen Action Service, and which is an NGO that works on democracy. So not only my research career before this move was focused on democratic processes, mostly elections and parties in election, and how the party managed to represent citizens and create a link between citizens and the state. But now I'm also looking at the practitioner side, especially from the point of view of citizens. And of course, even though I started to work on AI and digitalization of electoral processes, electoral campaign and parties 7-8 years ago, I've been wondering for a long time how technology is affecting all these different processes of democracy. And that's why there's a burgeoning literature nowadays that works on how AI is affecting some elements, some specific subset of democratic processes, but that literature is mostly working in silos because either comes from computer science or philosophy or law or even political science, but even within those fields is focusing always on one specific subset of problems that are created by AI regarding democratic processes in general. And what I wanted to do is try to have some kind of effort of systematization of all these problems and risks in a way that will allow other researchers to actually measure those risks in different political contexts. It can be China, it can be US, it can be any European country, but the idea is to try to develop a framework that can be applied to many different contexts.
And Claudio, you come from a philosophy background when you came on the podcast last time, and I will ask you to kindly remind my listeners what you do. And I said that you are in the US because you were at Yale. But you come from a philosophy background, from an ethics background. You are very kind of focused on the idea of AI and how that interacts with the concepts of ethics and philosophy. How was working on a framework, so on a kind of like very schematic set of rules and of concept for you? How did you enjoy working on this paper? Tell us something about that.
Well, So unfortunately, my background is actually in law. But that's a mistake. I would like to. So I tried to fix the mistake, and so I specialized in legal philosophy. And during my PhD, I mainly worked in. I mainly studied and researched in legal philosophy and ethics of emerging technologies. So then this is just to say that I have some familiarity with like frameworks and rules and all these kind of boring things. But I think the idea of the paper, the very, let's say, Julia and I worked on several papers at this point together, and there is always like some connection between AI and democracy. Either how to use AI to improve the democratic environment or to understand which is actually the risk of AI for the democratic environment. Um, and I think that it's now quite established in the literature that there is this correlation between AI expansion and something which is called democratic backsliding. So very simply, the progressive erosion of democratic institutions, democratic standards and practices. And even though this is not, I mean, we argue in the paper that it's not AI causing democratic backsliding, it's a significant correlation. Maybe if we picked digital technologies and social media in general, the correlation will be even stronger. But in any case, the real point is that we are witnessing this correlation. And still, the literature is not very clear in identifying the specifically the AI dangers for democracy, and even more importantly, how to measure them. Because at the end of the day, any kind of risk and any kind of concern about dangers in human activities and digital technologies is a matter of how you want to prioritize risks and how you want to balance risk against advantages of a specific activity or technology, and basically how you decide which kind of risk is acceptable or not. So the very purpose of the paper is that to, as the title suggests, identify AI dangers in democracy, to measure them, but even more importantly, to understand which is our risk appetite in taking and using and delegating democratic tasks to AI systems. So I think that the real point of the framework that we use is that.
Right, a system of priorities. And that's actually quite interesting. I find, of course, as I said many times, I love this paper and I think it's brilliant because, I mean, a couple of months ago, I think the MIT put out this paper that said that I think out of 24 AI users that they have studied, something like 18 had existential risk percentages or probabilities. So, when you're thinking of prioritizing risks, and you already come from a possibility that a huge percentage of risk could lead to an existential threat to society, to humanity. I think um, prioritizing it becomes even more kind of relevant to the whole of society. It's not just a problem from lawyers or technicians when they actually follow the rules. And talking about the rules, I think probably we can maybe start talking about the issue of having rules in our interaction with AI. So when we have a human interacting with AI, we have potentially a human that delegates, as Claudio kind of foiled a bit. The concept of they delegate their tasks to the AI. And when we're talking about democratic rights and tasks, we're talking about potentially threatening democracy. So when we see this interaction between the human that delegates and the AI that executes, what kind of problems can we identify when it comes to in relation to democracy?
Well, I will start, then maybe Claudio can also jump in later on. So that's where the framework really provides something useful, I think, for the readers, because the main in the paper is the principal agent theory. And this is a theory that actually has been developed in economics and then applied to many different subsets of research in political and science and sociology. But basically, the idea is that the relationship between a principal, so anybody that can use an AI system for doing whatever in politics and in democratic processes, needs to delegate some of their authority about decision-making processes to the AI, which acts as an agent. And when this happens, there are mainly two problems that arise. Information asymmetry, because the principal, the public administration, the political party, the campaign executive, the citizens that try to get information about an election online, does not have all the relevant information for understanding how the AI agent work and how the outputs are actually generated. And second point, there's a goal misalignment, because sometimes it can happen that either the AI system itself or the vendor or the provider of the AI system have different goals, different priorities than the principal. And there's a lack of control between the principal and what the agent actually does. And that's where this delegation chain breaks, and that's where risks emerge. So the principal agent problem in theory in the paper allows to understand where this delegation process can malfunction, can lead to a failure, while the different indicators that we suggest for measuring risk can allow to measure and assess exactly what can go wrong and how to measure the amount of failure, let's say, that can come out from this malfunctioning of the delegation process.
Yeah, and if I may, this is a very accurate description of the principal agent theory and its use in this field. As an analogy to better understand what are we talking about, just think of when government agencies hire external contractors. There are some rules. There are the very point of the principal agent theory is that tasks that are delegated to the agent from the principal are generally very difficult to monitor and to supervise, and the failures stem from this difficulty in the oversight. So when a politically accountable body delegates some tasks to some privately owned and managed AI system, as Julia was saying, the information asymmetry, the goal divergence between the two actors is the main source of risk, is the main source of danger. What is important, if I can add something, is that we are not only delegating tasks to a machine, but as very well established in literature at this point, we are delegating tasks, and in this case, democratic tasks, to a social technical system, which is very used expression in literature, sometimes used vaguely. But the point is that we are delegating tasks to a very complex organization with a very precise division of labor, with some form of direct interaction between the artifact and the organizational culture, the organizational values. So it's this complex interaction that creates AI dangers of AI for democracy.
I'm gonna kind of bring this point a tiny bit back to discuss a very, very difficult concept to define, and I am sorry for the question, but for our listeners' sake and for mine as well, how do you define democracy? And in that, okay, it's an awful question. I'm aware of it. I can see Claudio is not very happy about this question.
No.
My point is, like, we're talking about the democratic state, so the whole apparatus of people and laws and to a certain extent services that bring a democratic life or a living standard to the citizen, or are we talking about really the simple concept of voting? And I'm asking because I know that we come from different places in the world and we can see democracy in a different way.
Okay, I don't know whether Claudio wants to go first, but I'll just answer partially, but then point to another element that's in the paper that can be useful for understanding this. First of all, we try to focus on a very simple the definition of democracy, meaning, of course, the minimal definition based on free and fair election, but also having an information ecosystem that is free and plural with enough opportunities for citizens to participate and to get full information, or as full as possible information, about the supply of different policy opportunities that is offered by political parties, with enough competition in elections. But beside the definition, the idea is that the paper looks at 5 different dimensions of democracy that are crucial in general, but also for understanding how this delegation failure can happen. So we look at participation, meaning citizen engagement and citizen access to information, to have enough information for understanding how democracy works and which are the different choices that are offered to them. Second, representation, so how preferences are transmitted from citizens to elected representative and parties. Competitiveness, so elections, fair access to electoral contestation, and transparency and accountability. So the how decisions can be monitored, can be judged by citizens once they are taken by governments or public administration, public services. And last point related to this one, responsiveness, in the sense how much policy decisions correspond to the preferences that are manifested by citizens during or around elections. So these are the 5 dimensions that are crucial. Of course, the amount of democracy, let's say, in each of these dimensions changes from one case to the other. So the definition of democracy is always, at least from a political science perspective, always a question of thresholds. That's also a way for categorizing democratic backsliding. That's how, for example, the big data sets on the measurements, operational measurements of democracy like VDEM work. These are, for example, they measure episodes of democratic backsliding rather than deciding what is or not a fully fledged democracy.
Yeah, I do agree. It's when it comes to defining democracy, it's always quite difficult because you can have more valorial or procedural definitions of democracy. I think that the main usage we do of the concept in the paper is basically ensuring some form of informed participation of citizen in the public sphere. I don't know if Julia agrees with that, but we are mainly talking about the public sphere. So the public decision making, the information ecosystem, the role of institutions, the way citizens can change the course of action of public institutions, and so on and so forth. So it's not just voting, it's not just the electoral domain, it's not just political parties, it's these informed participation of citizen in public decision making.
That's brilliant, and I'm really sorry for the question, but I know that the question is useful for our listeners to kind of put this discussion in a framework, in the framing of a state and of what we're expecting potentially the state to do, and so that we can have free and fair elections, which is, as you said, the basic definition of it. Let's go then from the kind of context to the rules. So there has quite a strong, the paper has quite a strong influence from the NIST AI risk framework. I know that some of our listeners will be quite kind of comfortable with using the framework, especially in the US. But again, not everyone will know about it. So maybe, Giulia, I'm going to ask you, why did you pick the NIST framework? Why is it useful? And then we can go from there to the concept of trustworthiness and how you defined it and used it in the context of your paper.
Okay. Well, we decided to use this framework because the NIST framework because I was searching for some kind of widely acceptable and accepted set of very operational indicators for measuring what actually can go wrong in terms of amount of risks that can be generated by using AI in democratic settings. And therefore, this was a more or less automatic choice because the NIST 2023 AI risk management framework is among the most comprehensive, but also accepted worldwide in identifying these 7 characteristics of trustworthy AI. So being valid and reliable, safe, secure and resilient, accountable and transparent, explainable and interpretable, privacy enhanced and fair with harmful bias somehow managed. And this was, let's say, a bit the easy way to find something that is, on the one hand, very detailed, already well established and developed, and can be used for easily adapting the framework to a specific subset of dimension, like the 5 democratic dimensions that I were mentioning before, and is also widely acceptable. So if I'm talking about this in Europe or in the US, everybody more or less understands what I'm talking about. But also because it allows us also to, and maybe I'll let Claudio say more about this, to point to some aspects that, or challenges that the NIST itself flags unresolved, and that maybe in the next paper or as a scholar can work on, in the sense that some of the metrics might be immature because there's less consensus than in other on how to quantify some of these elements, like trustworthiness, for example. And of course, when you measure these things and measure these indicators in real words, the type of measure can vary a lot from one context to the other. Second, the lock-in or the dependence in a third party, like pre-trained models, a vendor system, externally curated data, can make it hard to allocate risk to specific actors. And of course, the risks change across life cycle. But bottom line, as also Claudio said before, everything also, the use of this allows for pointing to future work that still needs to be done, mostly because the measurement of risk and how severe harm can be in these democratic processes caused by AI, by the widespread adoption of AI, relies on the decision of how much risk is acceptable. And this is an evaluative judgment, is normative related, and therefore we need to work further on how to develop measurements and decisions about the specific points. So the idea this paper is a starting point, is a first suggestion on how to operationalize these delegation problems and risks, but also allows for thinking about what is left to be done, which is a lot.
Yeah, as Julia said, the decision of picking the NIST framework is mainly because it's the more established risk management framework. If you look at it, it's not even that accurate and that sophisticated if you compare it with the risk management systems that we have in other fields, in climate change or nuclear energy. And also, it's basically a list of criteria. I wouldn't call it even a risk management system, a risk management assessment methodology. It's a list of criteria. We picked it because it's well established. It's not that different from taking like a normative text, a law or a normative text, just because it's the common reference. But of course, as Julia suggested, risk management is all about implementation, and it's all about how you evaluate that specific risk in specific conditions and what's the resulting risk appetite of a specific group of people. That's the same problem that we have in the AI Act. We have a form very confused of risk assessment, let's say, framework. How this will be done concretely, how the risk will be calculated in specific situations is still very obscure.
I think the problem of lacking transparency, therefore, the incredible amount of obscurity of literally lack of understanding of how systems work is obviously an issue that comes across when we're trying to evaluate the effectiveness of a framework such as the NIST, or let's call it a framework of the AI Act. I'm skeptical on any side, so it's okay. But it also comes to the evaluation, of course, of the mitigation strategy. And I would like to kind of look at who is meant to implement a mitigation strategy for the risk. So the problem of risk prioritization, the one that you highlighted at the beginning of this conversation, is obviously the reason why you need a framework. So, which we have, starting from the assumption that we have some risks, which one we solve first, second, third, fourth, at the same time, potentially and hopefully. I would say in the context of an agent principle scenario, who has to implement the risk management framework in this case? How did you solve that problem of having big corporations, big companies being basically the agent and big states being the principal?
So if you want to, I can go first. There are basically two main actors that can implement some form of risk assessment. One is the state, let's call it like that, generally, more or less directly. So either in first person or through some external contractors used for this specific purpose, and that's the solution proposed by the AI Act, for instance, the risk assessment is done by companies and deployers, AI deployers themselves. In this case, so the way we are describing the delegation task, democratic bodies can count, this is important, can count as AI deployers according to the AI Act. So they will be responsible for the risk assessment. It's a mix, of course, of these two options. There are some risk monitoring and risk assessment measures that should be taken by companies in first place, and then there should be an audit. There should be like an evaluation of how you actually implemented and how you actually performed the risk monitoring.
Yeah, so if I can comment on that, this is a paper that is meant to do the first step in finding a solution to a problem, meaning measuring it. Once it's measured, then you can understand what are the dynamics, the underlying condition, and suggest exactly, and suggest some form of solution or policy recommendation. We're not there. We're still at the very first step, which I think is already a good thing. But in order to understand something, you need to measure it. I come from quantitative social science. That's where this need to measure things for understanding how they can be corrected or improved comes from. But in the paper, we suggest, and that's something that is a concept that is also widely accepted in the literature. We propose to focus on the concept of accessibility, meaning the accessibility of technology, in this case of AI, meaning evaluating how easily and effectively a technology, in this case AI, can be reviewed, can be tested, and can be audited by interested parties, in this case public administration and governments, but also to some extent citizens. So we don't have solution yet, but the idea is that this kind of auditing, this kind of accessibility mechanism should be somehow adopted everywhere AI system is used in politics or in democratic processes. This is the ideal, let's say, solution, which means attaching it to procurement rules, legislating for it, using it in party law, using it in elections laws, using it for in regulation concerning media access and pluralism and so on. So it's either rules or procurement slash funding money and financial aspects attached to the use and the provision of technology that can work. But the policy solution, let's say, step is still in the future.
If I can add something, I do agree with Julia that probably the easiest entry point in these situations is to design procurement rules in a specific way. So we probably will have to do that. And in some situations where you don't really have clear regulations, so for instance, in party competition, political parties are not heavily regulated in most legal systems because they are, I mean, Julia is the expert here of party politics, but in most legal systems, they are private associations. So they are not heavily regulated. And in those situations, probably when these parties use AI systems for several uses, some form of risk management comes from the soft power, let's say, of competition between parties. So there is a specific interest of a competitor political party to point and to show that the other political party, the enemy, let's say, quote unquote, is using AI in a wrong way, in a way which does not, which violates human rights, or in a transparent way, is delegating too much to AI, and so is losing any kind of control over it, is losing any kind of in-house expertise, and so on and so forth. So I think that for each segment, for each dimension of democracy that we are identifying in the paper, there is a different governance architecture.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are some countries in which party competition and party organization are regulated by the states, like Germany. There are other systems like the UK or at European level in which there are some kind of guidelines that are not binding but exist. But nothing so far is integrated in this kind of regulation and governance settings, as Claudio was saying, concerning the use of AI. So for the moment, unless the regulations are changed, the only way to try to address these issues is through rules concerning financing, so procurement, for example, or funding of political organizations or actors that use AI system in their workings.
I'm going to ask you a very kind of futuristic question, but because we talked about the future and like what the ideal future would be, let's also talk about the dire version of the future, considering the current political parties, especially in specific countries that you have also named. My question is, what happens if, let's say, some framework like yours is kind of voluntarily set aside because the short-term gains of using AI the wrong way seem more preferable than, let's say, actually having a more stable, long-term and long-lived democratic society. I mean, as you said, many parties are private organizations. What if they go for their own gain rather than actually collaborating together to get to laws, to rules that can be implemented to regulate AI in the correct way?
Well, if I can go first, this is not even a question of if, it's a question that is happening now for two reasons. A, because there are several political actors, parties, movements that do not care about leveling the playing field or playing in a fair way in elections. And two, for many political actors nowadays in Europe, but also outside Europe, democracy per se is not their goal, is not something they want to achieve. They are becoming more and more anti-system and actually operating for, I'm not saying subverting democracy, but for changing democracy in a way that will lose its constituting elements. So for the moment, this is not a futuristic question. This is something that is already happening. And from the European side of things, I will let Claudio maybe answer concerning the US, that he certainly knows better than me. At European Union level, for example, European institutions are mobilizing massively for developing instruments, not legislative, technical legislative instrument, but for setting up a governance system that can prevent these kinds of issues in the next European elections. For example, last December, the Commission has presented the European Democracy Shield, which is a legislative package, but with also more very practical elements for trying to strengthen civil society, to try to develop non-strictly legislative rules or packages that can make elections function in a more competitive way, that develop several hubs for like a civic tech hub, a disinformation hub, for example, preventing disinformation spreading even more in national information ecosystems in the EU member states, and so on and so forth. So at European level and also a national one, there are governance systems that are developed to try not even to prevent, because we are not in the prevention phase, but actually counteract what's happening.
Yeah, and I perfectly agree with Julia that seems like in many societies and political systems, there is almost some form of snobism towards democracy and its practices, as if it was not useful at all for solve concretely problems. Um, Regarding the American context and parties in here, of course, I take the fifth. But now, jokes aside, we know that there are parties using the Republican Party, for instance. We know for sure that it's using AI in different ways, and since the regulation is very soft so far, and since in general there is a great area of freedom for political parties in this country, there is no much control and much monitoring on it. We know where the Republican, I'm pretty sure that the Republican Party is using AI to, I mean, the less risky usage is to monitor social media trends, which is okay. But also we know that now they're starting kind of tracking and tracking and building some form of synthetic voters to test political electoral campaigns, messages, and also some policy decisions. So, as Julia said, it's not futurism; it's actually happening under our eyes.
Yeah, and if I can just finish with this example, actually, there are studies from the Department of Communication of the University of Amsterdam that actually have proven similar use of AI by Dutch party in the Dutch election that happened a few months ago. So this is happening also across the pond in a fully fledged democracy like the Netherlands. So it's not something abstract, but something that actually has already happened.
And if I'm correct in this, and probably like you can explore further this point, this is a kind of voluntary and direct use of AI. So it's a party, for example, using an own bought AI to track social media trends, like the Republicans. We're not talking about, for example, the use of AI via the manipulation of social media messaging, because as you obviously know, recommendation algorithms are also AI technology. So we're talking about, as you said, a procured AI system, some kind of direct decision to deploy AI systems to interfere with with the democratic kind of environment context in this case. Right.
Yeah, that's why I think one of the main dimensions that we analyze is the information ecosystem, because if you think how easily and how fast we shifted from search-based discovery of political information to AI generated summaries, and how much the use of deepfakes and any kind of manipulation of the debate and discussion on social media has happened over the last years, you realize that what we were taking as a good quality information ecosystem for the democratic environment is not there anymore. We are constantly changing our standards, and we are witnessing really this progressive erosion, not only in the quality of information, I would say, because sometimes the quality may even be slightly better, but the number of sources, the number of perspectives, how much inclusive is the information ecosystem, and the the number of information gatekeepers, which is, by the way, one of the standards and metrics that we suggest to take into account and to control quite closely, because if you consider the market share of these companies, you realize that the number of actors is actually decreasing. And since they also play not very clean, so you may feel like the debate on social media is very inclusive and everybody can say wherever they want and everybody can participate in the discussion. You know that, as you were mentioning, many of this debates are actually steered and directed by few actors, for instance, through AI bots and other tools.
Giulia, I'm going to ask you this question just to start off, and then I'm going to ask Claudio to give his opinion. After all of your research and also writing the paper, probably, like, would you suggest, if you could, would you advocate for a complete ban of the use of AI in the public sector? I know it's an extreme question, and I'm going to ask you why not.
Absolutely not, because we point at risks, but of course, AI has in general also positive externalities and can be used to perform tasks or amount of tasks that before were not possible. You know, any technology normally intervenes on two elements: accessibility and affordability, meaning making things easier and more accessible to everybody, and cutting costs, so making things, whatever process that is, to be done more quickly and in more effective way. So there are certainly positive things of using AI in the public sector, in public service delivery, in information ecosystems and media, in elections and so on. So absolutely, a ban will not, I don't think will be necessary, at least at this stage. We'll see how the technology evolves, but I don't think so. What is necessary, at least this is my own personal opinion as a citizen, not as a researcher, will be, or partially as a researcher, but mostly as a citizen, will be to shift the responsibility that for the moment is still given to citizens, because when we talk about AI, for the moment, the big solution is, oh, we need to strengthen AI literacy, AI capability in citizens or in individual organization or in civil servants, which is crucial. But we need to shift this responsibility from individual citizens or civil servants to the companies that provide the technology, in the sense that clearer guidance and governance of the type of technology that is provided, how it is provided, and how it is governed should be attached, let's say, in a more effective way to the provision of those services and the commercial aspects of the provision of those services. How? I don't know. That's why there are several very smart and well-paid European representatives that are pondering about that in the European Parliament, in the European institution. Again, I come from the European Union point of view, but I think that we are now past the AI literacy kind of solution. We need to move something that focus better on the companies, on the providers.
Yeah, here maybe I do agree with Julia that banning AI just in general by default is wrong. It's not feasible, first of all. It's not easy to monitor. You can ban AI system, but parties and their components and their members, sorry, will still use them. Citizen will still use them. So it's not feasible, not smart, not easy to monitor. We may have slightly different opinions regarding the responsibility, because I think that the main responsibility is probably on public civil servants, members of public institutions. I wouldn't say citizens. But yeah, these people are, because AI companies, they play on the market and they just try to sell you a product. And as long as they meet some basic requirements and some basic, let's say, legal conditions, I wouldn't force them to build something which is specific for democratic use. At the end of the day, is the knowledge and the expertise of the civil servant in understanding which kind of prompt you're supposed to use when you use an AI to give to an AI system, how to calibrate the temperature of the outputs of the AI system, what to expect, and how to use those outputs. I think this is mainly on the public institutions and their representatives. Yeah, that's basically my opinion.
Brilliant. I love a bit of a debate there. I'm going to ask you one last question. I promise I will let you go. Going back, kind of circling back to the concept of trustworthiness in the NIST AI risk framework. One of the seven concepts, let's say that all the seven concepts do not include the concept of nationality. Because, of course, the NIST framework is an international framework, is recognized internationally despite being kind of a product of the American group of researchers. My question is, to increase accountability of AI use in the public sector, do you agree with the idea that we need more sovereign AI, especially when we think of the European Union, but also when we think of the United States, when we see governments literally banning systems from being kind of traded elsewhere outside the United States? Do you agree with the idea that AI needs to be national, so to be used in the public sector?
You want to go first?
Go.
I don't have a preference for national AI, but mainly for two reasons. The first one is factual, empirical. So far, national AIs were very bad, and not just because they were not powerful and accurate, but because they were also non-reliant. They were not compliant with laws. many privacy leaks, many wrong outputs, many hallucinations. So it's not just, okay, they are less powerful. They're also like kind of, you know, um, wrong from the legal point of view. But the main, so, and that's the first reason. But the second reason, the main one, is that we should not assume that the state and the nation, let's say, is a neutral actor. And it's not necessarily a good actor who wants to defend citizen rights and so on. It may be the case that they actually go against people's interests and against people's rights and values. That's why we don't live just in. That's why we live in constitutional democracy, because we need something more than the state. It's not just state. It's we are a community of values. So I wouldn't trust not only the capacity of the state of building an AI system, but also of their being neutral actors and good actors. But I don't want to sound too harsh on this. Of course, we should favor some form of open source AI systems. And typically and generally, public actors have less economic interest and less economic incentive in closing AI systems. So probably those are the actors who can favor open source AI and an open source infrastructure. So of course they must be one of the players in the game, but I wouldn't rely too much on them. I wouldn't rely too much on a national AI.
Yeah, and if I totally agree, and if I can add on what Claudio just said, first of all, it's not a question of nationality or Eurostack technology, AI-related technology, digital sovereignty. The package has been presented a couple of weeks ago at EU level. But the point is how to link the creation of AI system and the vendors of those AI system to specific values. So to have an AI that is anchored, that is respecting some values that are considered to be important for the common good, for the citizens, for the functioning of democracy. And there can be national values, I mean, values that exist at national level or international level or European level, whatever, but it's not a question of level, a territorial level of government, but rather of values that must be attached to that. The difficulty with the AI compared to other technologies of communication that exist in the past, from the press to the television, that is normally in the past, these kind of technologies were, think about television before, were deployed mostly by the state, by public administration, and then they become commercial or were used in commercial settings, and therefore they were regulated. Every country in Europe and in the world has some kind of telecommunication authority that regulates how television work, for example. Well, this is not happening in the AI because actually the use and the development and deployment of this kind of system is completely left to the market, as Claudio was saying before. So it's not really a question of sovereignty. I don't think that a sovereign AI coming from Europe, for example, or from the UK or France or Italy would be better than Grok or any other. I mean, just for making an example that has been quite criticized.
The worst AI system,
exactly.
The worst language model.
Exactly, but or any other chatbot or model or system, but it's really a question of finding a governance system that works at different levels and that can attach this kind of values to specific models that are sold and deployed at national level within democratic processes. And because we look at that, but of course the same discourse, the same dynamics work also for deploying and selling AI models for the workplace, for example, or for any other sector, of course, not just democracy.
Yeah, I think basically they have to step into the market. Even national AI system have to step into the market, and they must show that there is an advantage in using them compared to Grok or ChatGPT, Claude, you name it. So there must be an advantage. And this advantage could easily be like, we are protecting your data more, we are more transparent and blah, blah, blah. If they are good systems and also they grant these protections, these safeguards, of course, there will be an interest by institutions and other political actors to use them. So step into the market, be competitive. That's I think the solution also for national AI.
Yeah, of course. Let's say that, protecting democracy must become a factor that enhances competition rather than just being the assumption for using a specific system. So absolutely. Very interesting. And thank you for answering to that question that I asked. So, if you're interested in any of these topics, and I'm talking to our listeners, of course, please, guys, follow our show notes, or you can just search online. The title of the article is How to Detect and Measure the AI Dangers to Democracy. And the authors are our great guests today here, Giulia Sandri and Claudio Novelli. So I'm going to thank both for joining me today on the Legal Protect the podcast. It was amazing to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Julia. I hope to
Thank
see
you.
you soon for our next
Yeah,
episode.
absolutely. You're always invited, both of you, as I always say. And yeah, this was all for this episode of the Legal Protect, the podcast.
This episode was brought to you in partnership with DG Beetle. DG Beetle helps privacy professionals to stay up to date with the most important European documents in the AI, data and digital space every day. Curious to know more? Check out the link in our show notes.